Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPD to advance excellent teaching.
Why is a shy person often treated as if she or he is inadequate?
I messed up again.
Hello. What behavior can raise or lower our status with other people?
Ages.
Does getting a reward make us more or less creative?
Fabulous.
The self, this time on Discovering Psychology. In this program, we're going to turn our attention to ourselves, or more precisely, to the psychological concept of self, the individual's consciousness of his or her own identity. What does the mind's eye see when it looks into the self, into that special mirror that reveals one's innermost thoughts and feelings, our own private world we so often hide from others? Ancient Greeks who traveled to the oracle at Delphi for answers to their problems found this message inscribed on the shrine: "Know thyself." Centuries later, it was William James who in 1890 set the stage for the modern resurgence of psychology's interest in the self. In studying what he called the mind from within, James distinguished three aspects of the self: the material, the spiritual, and the social. The material self is our awareness of the physical world, our body and the people and things around us. The spiritual self is the part that thinks of ourselves as thinkers, the inner witness to events. And the part of the self that focuses on the images we create in the minds of others is called the social self. While it was William James who pioneered the scientific concept of self, many earlier philosophers and writers had also recognized this dimension of human nature. Some psychologists believe that the gradual separation of the young child from its mother, a process called individuation, is essential for developing a unique sense of self and a healthy personality. Failure to acquire an independent self-identity can lead to psychological problems. Today, many psychologists are keenly interested in studying the self, but there was a time when psychology focused almost exclusively on behavior. There was no place for anything as fuzzy as the concept of self. Even to Freud, the conscious self was little more than a weak, passive link in his triad of id, ego, and superego. Freud defined the id as the primitive unconscious part of the personality where drives and passions originate. The superego restrains the id. For Freud, the superego is a combination of the conscience and the ideal self. The ego, our conscious sense of self-identity, moderates between the id and superego, between our primitive impulses and our sense of moral obligation. Freud was much more interested in the dramatic confrontations between the unconscious id and the superego than he was in conscious processes of the ego. But other psychologists, such as Carl Rogers, seen here in the 1960s, put a much greater emphasis on aspects of the conscious self. Rogers led the humanistic movement, which was most responsible for psychology's return to the self. Instead of Freud's pessimistic view of a conflicted, impulse-driven creature, Rogers offered an optimistic vision of psychological growth and health.
There is within the individual a capacity for self-understanding, for self-direction, for guiding behavior in self-directed ways, which can be tapped if we can provide the right conditions. In other words, the individual does have a capacity and a potentiality for development and change and integration that doesn't need to be supplied from the outside.
And so we see in the humanistic view a self that is striving toward personal fulfillment, an inner guiding force that moves us toward positive actions and enhancement. It is a self imbued with the kind of virtue that gives humans kinship with the angels. For psychologists, the next step after describing the properties of the self has been to explore just how this dynamic mental structure works in controlling behavior. Researchers who study the self talk of the self concept, the individual's awareness of his or her continuing identity as a person. This self concept is viewed as an internal regulator of thoughts, feelings, and behavior. It interprets and organizes our ongoing experiences. It reflects on how our present actions compare with our standards and expectations. And it affects our performance by providing plans, scripts, goals, and incentives. We organize our beliefs and information about ourselves in terms of schemas or knowledge clusters. For some people, gender schemas are all important. Masculinity and femininity dominates their thinking. Other people are weight schematic, always trying to lose weight and perceiving others primarily in terms of being fat, out of control, or being thin, having it all together. Our self-schema or self-image can have a powerful impact on our behavior. If our self-image is good, we try to live up to this standard. We try harder and succeed more often. If our self-image is bad, we tend to adjust downward and end up failing more often. So self-image can work for or against us. Along this line, Albert Bandura of Stanford has developed what he calls the theory of self-efficacy, a new theory of how the self works, which can help us understand how some people translate promise and passion into optimal performance.
Well, self-efficacy is concerned with people's beliefs in their capabilities to exercise control over situations that affect their lives. People who have a high sense of efficacy tend to take on challenges that they believe they can master, whereas those who are plagued by self-doubts tend to shy away from activities and situations that they feel exceed their coping capabilities. And these kind of choices can affect the kind of career paths and life paths they pursue.
Bandura and his colleagues conduct experiments, manipulating factors that affect self-efficacy and demonstrating how self-efficacy influences performance. In this experiment, researcher Delia Chaffee gives the subject the task of improving production at a model furniture factory. She tells him that his ability to make good decisions for the factory is based on innate intelligence and ability.
The higher one's basic capacities and these skills, the better one will perform. Now, the computer program pretty much paces you through it, evaluating and testing your decisions.
The next subject is told that complex decision-making is an acquirable skill, that his performance can improve through his own efforts.
In any new skill, one doesn't begin with faultless performance, but the more one practices formulating and testing decisions, the better one gets at it.
The first subject, who thinks decision-making ability is a measure of his intelligence, proceeds cautiously. He sets lower goals for himself and is frustrated by an increasing number of incorrect decisions. His confidence, measured by the number on the lower left of the screen, keeps falling, as does his sense of efficacy. The second subject, however, sees early mistakes as a necessary part of learning. He profits by them, and his performance improves. He sets higher goals for himself, and his response to questions about confidence demonstrate an increasing sense of his own efficacy.
The issue is not what you have, but how you use what you have. And from this point of view, you see, you can have the same competencies and subskills and use them poorly, adequately, or extraordinarily, depending on your self-belief. So for this reason, you can often predict people's accomplishments better from their self-belief rather than from their just past attainments.
Up till now, we've been concentrating on that part of the self which focuses inward to assess its capabilities. But there's another aspect of the self that focuses outward to get a fix on the impression being created in others. This outward focus, the awareness of the social self, asks the questions, how am I coming across? What impression am I creating? Do you see me the way I see myself? Do you see me the way I'd like you to see me? Here at Stanford University's Theater Department, Patricia Ryan teaches drama and the nuances of self-presentation in American culture. Hi, Patricia.
Hello, Phil.
As a drama teacher, you train actors in self-presentational skills to help them convey an impression to an audience. How does that work?
Well, there's a concept we use called status, which has to do with how we manipulate the affect of ourself to one another. The content in a given circumstance can be the same, but the way in which I speak to you, the way that I use nonverbal cues will affect my relationship to you. There are 4 aspects that we can manipulate in terms of status transactions. The first of these would be eye contact. And it's commonly known that eye contact is a useful device in asserting oneself. As I'm continuing to talk about this subject, start averting your gaze from time to time. Fail to make eye contact with me, but stay in the scene and continue to listen, but just change the way in which you relate. Something has shifted in the way nothing else has shifted except that you're not really looking at me. How does it make you feel when you do that?
Disengaged. I mean, we're not in synchrony the way we were before.
Another variable, of course, is whether or not the body is moving in a sustained way or whether it has sort of jerky movements. As soon as I begin to kind of move my body in jerky ways, it also affects my speech, you notice. It's hard to sustain sentences when I'm moving and my head's moving up and down. Yeah. And a lot of people kind of, but it at the cost of their status in some cases. So that the prototype for high status would be someone who is basically calm, who speaks in complete sentences, breathes deeply, makes eye contact, and doesn't have any particular jerky mannerisms.
Can we demonstrate some of these?
Yes, we could. There's a short scene in which we'll play ourselves in just coming to meet one another. The scene begins, you say hello.
Hello.
And I say hello. And you say, been waiting long.
Been waiting long.
And I say, ages.
That's going to be constant in all the scenes?
Right. Now, the first time we play it, why don't you come in maintaining high status kinds of postures with the eyes and face and body, and I'll play low status behavior and see what the result is.
All right, let's do it.